Okay, so let's just.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, welcome. So I know, Colleen, you know who I am. You know, I'm a nurse and I'm a health educator, and I've been teaching yoga and meditation for about 25 plus years now. And the agency that I work with when I'm not doing my volunteer service here at Unity is the NORC, which is an agency that's focused on helping people age in place. So we do everything we can to help people live where they want to live for as long as they want to live there, which is sometimes very basic stuff like rebooting their computer, but it's very enjoyable work. So, and I want to welcome you. And we did a survey. We sent out a survey in the summer to see what people's interests were in terms of some wellness support programs, and stress management came out top of the list every single time. So what I've tried to do is put together a series of 4 sessions, mini sessions, not lasting more than 15 or 20 minutes, because I know time is precious to everybody. And also to remind you that self-care, the kinds of things we're talking about here, is really healthcare, because there's no way anybody can care for another person. And that's basically the work that we do, which is caring for others, unless we take care of ourselves. So that is, we say it, but we don't internalize it. So it's always good to find a way to remember that. So what I want to remind you of before we get started is, you know, despite all the stresses that are going on, you need to remember and give ourselves credit for all the things we've been through in our life, all those difficult situations that we've managed to negotiate, maybe not perfectly, but at least successfully. So we're going to hopefully be able to build on some of that strength. So over the next 4 weeks, I'm going to just remove this. There we go. We're going to be following this outline for the focus of our discussions. This week, we're going to focus on the idea of what stress is and how it affects us. Next week, we're going to look at the upside of stress. Maybe you didn't know that existed, but we're going to talk about it and show that it does in fact exist. And then the third and the fourth week, we're going to be looking at actually practicing some techniques that you can call on every day when stress tends to build up to help you manage. And I always call it stress management, not stress reduction, because I can't reduce your stress. I wish I had a magic wand that I could wave that would make it all go away. But I don't have that, but I do have some tools in my toolbox that I'm more than happy to share with folks to help them manage. So this week, we're going to look at stress and how it affects us. So what do we know about stress? We know it's definitely a part of life. It's part of your personal life, your family life, your work life, and it's going on in the larger community now with politics and COVID, and all of those things affect us. And we also need to remember that whatever the stress is that arises, regardless of the cause, regardless of the intensity of the cause, our minds and our bodies have only one response we can call up. And that response triggers a cascade of chemicals in our body, which activates the fight, flight, or freeze response. That's the stimulation that happens in our sympathetic nervous system. Hopefully, by understanding this, we can begin to work with our mind and our bodies to help reduce the negative impact of that stress. So the first part is stress is a part of life. This is a very good working definition. It's a non-specific response. It means it affects us, the whole person. It affects you physically. And I'm sure you can think of some of the physical responses you experience when you're under stress. You get a knot in your stomach. Maybe you have difficulty catching your breath. Your hands get cold. Maybe your mouth dries up. Those are physical responses, but there's also mental responses to stress where we become focused on the target and tend to let everything else fall into the background. And emotionally, if stress continues, we become hardwired to respond in a stressful way rather than reverting to the relaxed. And it happens whether the threat is a very real physical threat or an imagined threat. So that's key to what we're going to be working with, understanding the difference and how that should affect our response. But stress is not bad. I mean, if it wasn't for stress, we probably wouldn't be on this planet, because over the millennium, we're hardwired to do protective mechanisms to protect ourselves from predators, from injury, from all kinds of things in the environment. So let's look at that stress response. How does it happen? Well, in the first stage, you get stimuli from one or more of the five senses, and it goes to your brain. And it could be anything. It could be something as simple as somebody cutting you off in traffic, or if you're outside and you smell smoke and suspect there's a fire. If you get a phone call from your boss saying, I'd like to meet you in the office, we need to have a conversation. Even for a lot of people, the idea about having to get up in front of a group to do some public speaking can elicit the stress response. So in the second stage, our brain deciphers this stimulus as either a threat or a non-stress or a non-threat. If they determine it's a threat, then the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And that's what I was talking about the cascade of chemicals that come pouring into our bloodstream. Things like adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol. And when we talk about the negative impact of stress on our health, cortisol is really the one that they're looking at, because that tends to persist in our bodies a lot longer than the adrenaline or the epinephrine. The interesting thing is that there are two other chemicals that are seldom talked about when it comes to the stress response, and that is DHEA and oxytocin. And they are very important, and we're going to be touching on those more in depth next week when we talk about the upside of stress. So supposedly you recover from your stressful experience, you have the conversation with your boss. It wasn't so bad. Maybe they're talking about giving you a raise. And then you can relax. And when you relax, your parasympathetic nervous system becomes activated. That we call rest and digest. And that's really a nice way to be. And then in the final stage, we're back to normal, homeostasis. The threat is gone and calmness returns. So what I'd like to do is just pause for a moment and get some feedback from you on what you think so far. What about that information?
Oh, while you were going through the stages, I could absolutely think of times in the past where, it made me think of situations where I was feeling really stressed. And I had that exact response, whether it was the physical response or the mental response. But yeah, absolutely. There's definitely times in my life where I absolutely can identify with that on a
Right.
regular basis.
On a regular basis.
Especially
Yeah,
these days.
exactly. It doesn't take much to trigger us. And that was an important point in all this, is that when it comes to the stress response, we are one-trick ponies. Our body knows only how to do one thing, and that is to trigger that cascade of chemicals.
Automatic.
It's automatic, and it's helpful, because otherwise, if we walked out into the street and there was a car barreling towards us and we didn't have a stress response, we'd probably just stand there and look at the car as it ran us over. So, that trigger of those chemicals, the blood pours into the big muscles of your body so that you can either fight the threat or run away, right? Your pupils dilate so that you can see better. But what happens in your mind is you can get, we don't just call it fight or flight. We call it fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
If you've ever been in a situation that was so incredibly stressful that you were immobilized, that's the freeze response, and it can happen. So hopefully by learning how to pick up the early signs, we can do some interventions that will help us manage better. So let me start the share again. All right. So I hate to tell you this, Colleen, but I'm going to give you some homework.
Oh, that's okay. I'm used to it. That's fine.
You may, if you forget, if you've got your phone handy, you might want to take a picture of the screen just so you remember what it says, or you can look at the video later. So during this coming week, between now and next week, I just want you to begin to notice, and you're already, it sounds like, paying attention to those early signs of stress when they show up for you. So notice when you feel stressed. What was the trigger for that? How did your body feel? And just notice all those subtle little changes, whether it's the tightness in the stomach or the headache or whatever it is that you notice, just notice. And then notice too, not just what's happening in your body, but what's going on with your thoughts and emotions during that time and what your reaction was. So what we're going to do when we get together next week, talking about those other two chemicals that I mentioned, DHEA and oxytocin, in relation to stress, and how it ties in with what we call the upside of stress.